Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event on ransomware targets databases 2, stay protected with zero trust. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubric and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things that you should know about this webinar. So first off, we want this to be an interactive event for you. So we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions in real time during the live event in chat, but we'll also have a session for live Q&A at the end, where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, links, and downloads. A lot of great resources from Rubric, including a ransomware recovery assessment, some guided product demos, and a white paper. There's also a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as the ATM Event Center, where you can find out about all the events on our calendar. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. And third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. Of course, you must be in attendance, during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in your handout section as well. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, there's one other thing that I want to mention. One of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look over all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic event. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our speaker today. We have Sean McElhaney, who is an Oracle Solutions Architect for Rubric. Sean, welcome to the event.
Thanks, Scott. Got a lot of material that we're going to try to cover today, and I'm going to be running it from my desktop, so I'm going to enable my screen share. So let's see what we get.
I'll let you know what I see.
Everybody able to see my screen?
Yeah. You see a PowerPoint slide. Yep.
You got it. We're good to go. All right. As I said, thanks for the kind intro, Scott. I really appreciate it. We got a lot to talk about in this session, so I really want to get into it with you. So let's get started here. Quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll start with a short discussion on why zero trust is important. Then we'll dig into some of the challenges that legacy backup solutions face when it comes to the concept of zero trust. Next, we'll dig into what questions you as a consumer should be considering when it comes to zero trust data security and what features you should really expect to see. Then we'll transition to discussing how automated data management really enhances a zero trust model. And lastly, we'll recap some of the major points and discuss some next steps you may want to consider. All right, so let's get into it. Why should you be thinking about zero trust data security? Well, the past few years really have shown us that cyber threats are a major revenue stream for malicious actors. These acts should really be keeping the C-suite up at night, as they can have a significant amount of impact on a firm. If a firm really doesn't adequately prepare for cyber threats, there's a greater possibility that your business will be significantly impacted by an attack. And odds are that if you're impacted, it'll impact your ability, hinder your ability to generate revenue. And that's the last thing that you really want to have as a business. I find this particular statistic to be staggering. Ransomware attacks are really growing in popularity and are wreaking havoc across industries. There's no business too big or too small. As such, we really need to take steps to minimize the impact of a potential attack. Now, periodically through this, I'm going to pause because I got to get a drink. Thank you for bearing with me. Now, this is where the concept of zero trust data security really can come into play as part of a backup solution. This acts really as the final layer to protect your backups in the event of an attack, and it really should include the following features: encryption by default, secure logins, backup retention that meets your needs, and a single platform really to cover the entire process. And lastly, you want to have that logical air gap between your systems and your backups, and NTP protection. And with those things, you have a solution that's virtually impenetrable to ransomware. So you have a little bit of information now on what zero trust data protection is, along with some statistics that should make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. With that information, we can now dig into some of the challenges that we face with modern database protection. The biggest challenge that we're facing as IT professionals is protecting the common thread in all our applications, our data. The statistics I presented earlier really reiterate this fact. And this is why data is the value target in most attacks. If you don't protect your data properly, you may not be able to recover. And your backups are rapidly becoming your last line of defense against attacks that impact your data. So the question really becomes, does your backup solution enable you to recover easily? Let's talk about some of the common components of legacy backup solutions. They tended to be based on homegrown scripts. They called an external scheduler, whether it be cron or some other third-party app. Backup media is typically accessible. There's multiple copies of the backups in various areas of your tech stack. And all of the activities are managed rather manually, which really slows recovery. So conceptually, it makes sense, but let's look at an example to really try to illustrate this point. Our legacy solutions can really put us at risk in a few areas. The typical legacy backup might work something like this. We've got lots of databases. They push data to backup storage, and then that data is replicated downstream, for systems to create your QA, test, dev, etc. Really doesn't seem like a big deal, right? Let's try to peel this back and look at it in more detail. Now, when we look at the script end of things, we get a lot of DBA activities. You get script creation, deployment of the scripts, management of the scripts, and then scheduling the backup executions. As your environment grows, so do the scripts and the scheduling of the backups. We won't even dig into trying to, coordinate impact performance. All these things together really make it a difficult solution to scale over time. So some of the shortcomings that we really need to consider here. This process really leaves you vulnerable. There's so many touch points, scripts, scheduling engine, staging area, and the amount of time your backups may be exposed before they're pulled off to the backup media. But your DBAs really aren't the only people that are feeling the pain in this scenario. Your backup admins are saddled with trying to size a backup staging area appropriately, scraping backups off the staging area, determining your backup retention, pushing backups off to long-term storage, archiving backups and the related media, and then staging backup medias for the database copies of the restores. The shortcomings we're dealing with, they tend not to use space efficiently. So you've got staging or temporary local storage. You've got a lot of that space duplicated on the backup media, and there's so many manual interactions here. How do you integrate a new backup into the script? How about scheduling and load balancing the new backups? And then what about managing space for the staging areas as new backups are introduced? But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The big thing we have backups for is to be able to recover. So let's talk about recovery a bit. Odds are, with separation of duties, that the DBAs won't have direct access to the backup storage media. That means they need to work with the backup admins to retrieve the files needed to perform a recovery. But big thing you have to consider is, do the file names that the database backup utilities generate directly map to the naming convention that the backup storage tool uses? If not, now the backup admin has to be able to translate the DBA required files to the appropriate files on the backup storage. Now you've got to be able to copy those files out to an accessible host. That might mean you have to engage your sysadmin team to mount the file systems on the appropriate host and make sure that you've got adequate space to spin up a database on that host. So now theoretically your restore process can begin, right? But how much time has passed between that initial request for the backup to be staged and the actual database recovery process? If this was an emergent need, would the team really be able to meet their SLA goal? So, the shortcomings here become pretty obvious. Recovery is tedious and it's exposed. How accessible is that staging area? Do you need some kind of secret decoder ring for communications between the DBAs and the backup teams? How does the DBA acquire the backup? Is there going to be enough disk space to house the backup and the restored database on the target? And do the DBAs have to build a custom recovery script for every recovery scenario? But the biggest concern that you might be dealing with is the ability to recover at all. If a company is attacked, is the backup storage secure and secluded so it can't be corrupted? Without your backups to restore, you've lost your last line of defense against ransomware. So, as you can see from what we just discussed, a lot of the shortcomings aren't with the database itself, but with the processes we're leveraging for backup and recovery. Moving toward a zero trust data security model can really help close a lot of these gaps. Going to grab a quick drink here, so bear with me. So here's some of the questions that we really want to make sure we're asking if we want to ensure data protection. Can the backups be manipulated? Can we access the backups easily? How do users authenticate to the backup application? Are you able to tell what files are compromised in the event of an attack? Where does your sensitive data live? Are you able to discover and contain malware that might be impacting your backups? And how quickly can you get your applications back online and free of any malicious code? Answering these questions really starts with a zero trust platform. The first thing on the platform will be ensuring secure backups. Part of that is having an underlying file system that is write once, read many, or a worm file system. This helps ensure immutability of your backups. So basically, once they're written to the file system, they can't be altered. The backup targets shouldn't be readily accessible. There should be some type of air gap to prevent unnecessary access to the backups. All your backups should be encrypted once they hit your backup media. Now, next we can start looking at how do we manage access to the backup system. Multi-factor authentication is a big thing that should be easily implemented as part of the solution. Time-based one-time passwords should also be used to help drive MFA for any of your local accounts. An authorization to any object or function within the backup system should be able to be managed via some type of role-based access controls. Lastly, we need to really move away from those arsenal of scripts and move to a broader policy-based type protection. Eliminate the needs for one-off scripts, schedulers, and attempting to scale this to an enterprise-grade solution. We also want to stay away from these special sauce kind of solutions. The backup systems should utilize the backup tools that are native to the objects you're trying to protect. This is where Rubric can come in and really start to stand above the competition. First thing, secure backups out of the box. We have MFA and TOTP, and the administrators can choose to implement MFA globally, or it can be implemented at a user level via time-based one-time passwords. Easy for me to say, apparently. Once these are enabled, the UI will generate a QR code that you can scan with an MFA app on your phone, like Google Authenticator. The other thing you should have is that concept of the append-only file system. I can't really demo it because it happens behind the scenes, so it's kind of hard to prove out in a timely manner. But I can talk to you a little bit about the logical air gap. So here's an example. I hope that this is easy enough for you guys to see. Multi-step process here. I ran df-h on this particular host to show you that on my initial run, there was nothing special that was mounted here. Then I went over to Rubric and started a log backup. Once that log backup was initiated, we can see, if I can find my mouse, there we go, that it has mounted 2 file systems on the host to conduct the backup. When the backup completed, the files, I ran df-h again, and the files are gone. So having that logical air gap there where Rubric is going to automatically bring the file systems online and mount them to your host specifically for backup execution gives you that extra layer of security. So that way, no one can readily access the media. And the last thing we're going to look at here is the concept of RBAC. We want to be able to assign privileges at a granularity to ensure least responsibility, but still enable the DBAs to do their job efficiently. So I'm going to pop up my UI here and show you some of the steps. So this is the base UI. If I want to create a role, say, for an Oracle DBA, I can simply come over here, click on Add a Role. It's going to be a custom role. Say Next. We'll call it John's DBA role. Now, I'm able to start assessing what kind of objects I want to protect, or be able to access, I'm sorry. So for this one, we're specifically interested in Oracle databases. Now, I've got a couple different options here. If I'm generating this role for, say, a junior DBA, I may want to limit access to a particular database, so I could select that database. But if this is something I'm generating, say, for an operational DBA, we know we've got certain systems that are in the mix, and there may be more coming online. So I may want to go to the extreme of saying, hey, select all current and future protectable objects that are identified as Oracle databases. What that does for me is it ensures that all my existing databases are protected and any new ones that are created in the future. It enables me to have access to the hosts that those databases are running on, and it also gives me access to any Oracle hosts that could be a target, so that way if I was doing a cloning exercise, I could be able to execute that without issue. But it doesn't stop there. I can get even more granular. So if I'm a backup admin, there's a possibility that I don't want this DBA to have access to all of the SLAs that exist. Maybe this is one that specifically works with AWS activities. So I can filter my list for AWS and say, yeah, I only want the DBA to have access to these 3 SLA domains. Furthermore, there may be some reports that I want them to have access to. Protection, so they can see some of the protection task details for backup times and what have you. And then another report that shows recovery statistics. Now I can also say, let's get granular. Can they take on-demand backups? Can they set a new data source so that they can ensure that any databases discovered on that host inherit the SLA from the host? Recovery options, well, this is a production DBA, so I'm going to make sure they have the ability to perform whatever recovery exercise they need. And the refresh source metadata, that's just simply allowing them to refresh data in the UI for a specific database. I can say next. I get a review pane that tells me exactly what I'm able to do. You'll see that it still has the SC2B dev selected because I had that clicked originally, even though I opted to go with protecting everything. My targets, it shows all of them. And then my other resources, it shows exactly what I've granted access to. I can add that, and then I'll have a new role created that I can assign to users. That simple. Now, back to this. All right. Next, bang, there we go. Another item that we have is the ability to have encryption of all devices on the cluster by default. So Rubric will show you every node that exists in a cluster and then tell you what the key management is and whether or not the encryption was successful or not. So you know that anytime a backup is hitting this media, it's on encrypted storage. Two other big items, the ability to, through unified job management, to get that policy-based protection. And then cloud mobility is where we've got the ability to, say, easily migrate, replicate, or archive data to the cloud. The good thing is Rubric can move data to most major cloud providers. Here's a summary view of an SLA domain. You can see that we can set the granularity of the backup frequency here and also how long we want to retain those backups. We're able to configure backups for log backups, T-logs for SQL Server, archive logs for Oracle. If you have a backup window that you need to work with, you can configure that. If you need to replicate your backup, say, to a DR site, you can configure that here too. And lastly, if you have cloud buckets, you can configure them in Rubric and set them as archival targets for the backups that complete. Now, global management and visibility is another item. Really what that's going to enable you to do is give you that full visibility of what's going on in your solution. And then reduce storage means you're going to get better disk utilization out of your environment so you don't end up wasting space. Here's some examples. Global management and visibility, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, this gives you the ability to quickly assess the health of your cluster and the status of any Rubric task that's going on. But here's one of my favorite reports. I filtered the report down to a single database so that you can get an idea of the space savings. If we take a look at the level 0 backup here, you'll see that I've protected nearly 30 terabytes of data with this database, but it only consumed 15.5 terabytes on disk. Not too shabby. Now, let's check out what incremental forever backups give us when we start looking at our level 1 backups. You see we have 2 level 1 backups. Each are about 60 gig of change. Now, if we look, we're still logically protecting the entire database, that nearly 30 terabytes. But we're storing significantly less data. So we're getting more efficient use of the space that we have available to us. All right, so Zero Trust platform is great, and it makes us feel a lot more secure with what we've got. But one of the bigger problems that we're still dealing with are the results of human error. Automation can really help us minimize, if not eliminate, that issue. So there's a couple things that we have to remember especially that securing backups is our starting point. But if we're still executing everything manually, the risk of human error still comes into play, as we have script and scheduled jobs that need care and feeding, especially as the systems grow. Meeting our RTOs as the database backups grow becomes a lot more difficult to do. And there's always some human interaction in the process, so generating self-service kind of requests aren't an option. So at the end of the day, you end up with lots of disparate tools, lots of databases, and lots of data to back up, which gives you lots of opportunity for error. By automating our data management tasks on a zero trust data security platform, we can accomplish the following. Get database protection onto a single platform. Give DBAs control of recovery operations and ensure that stringent RTOs can still be met. Start automating database discovery and protection. No more augmenting and modifying scripts, and remember to modify backup jobs so that things get included. And lastly, try to remove a lot of that manual intervention in the cloning process. Bear with me for a moment. So it's pretty clear that automation can provide a number of benefits. But what questions should you really be asking when you're considering an automated backup solution? Well, one of the things you got to think about is how easily can you implement this kind of protection at scale? Can you define that policy-based protection across a broad set of objects? Does the solution leverage the data available to it to ensure the most efficient and effective execution of tasks? Using something like machine learning as an example. Does the solution really utilize the native backup tool sets for the objects that are being protected? Can you leverage API calls to perform all the tasks that you see in the UI? How quickly can you make your data available for restore so that you can hit those stringent RTOs? And then can you easily move data to and from your various cloud providers? So let's talk quick about how Rubric can really help on the automation end of things. First, let's stop doing all the mindless work and focus on some value-add activities. Right? We can start by automating the Rubric backup service deployment and discovery. Why use the UI, when you can use wget to pull down the package to deploy the backup service, and then do a bulk deploy of that to all the hosts in your environment and automate the install on multiple hosts. Now, with that done, you can make a single API call to do a bulk discovery of all the hosts that you've deployed the RBS to. Another item, we want to make sure we can get data in the user's hands quickly. Our automation tasks really focus on user enablement. Enabling the users really means making sure that they've got timely access to data. Using the Rubric Live Mount feature to bring databases online really breaks that down to minutes instead of hours. So remember that 30 terabyte database I was showing you? Here's where I live mounted it in just over 34 minutes. Not many solutions out there are able to get terabytes of data online so quickly. How about enabling self-service with our APIs and integrations, right? End users shouldn't have to access your backup solution to enable self-service. You can use third-party integrations with tools like Ansible and ServiceNow to automate your configuration management and IT service requests. And we all know, if you've dealt with it, cloud migrations can be a little painful. The good thing with Rubric is we can remove a lot of the manual tasks out of a migration. So you can enable cloud archival to your cloud provider's standard class storage buckets and then recover the database on cloud infrastructure. But we all know there's really no such thing as an easy button. But Rubric's going to give you the tools that you need to really get rolling with automation. And let me show you what some of those are here. So API automation. Let me get this squared away here. We have our build.rubric.com site where you can integrate with software development kits that we offer. Mention tooling integrations for Ansible, Terraform, ServiceNow. And then we also have use case specific scenarios where if you can look up and see if there's a specific use case that you're interested in and use the steps there to help implement that. But another option we have, and let's see how lucky I can get with what might have scrolled off the screen already, is we also have this API code capture utility that can be integrated into the developer tools on your Google Chrome browser. So anything that you do in the UI, you can also see what the API request was. So here's a post call that was made. So I see the exact syntax and the parameters that were provided to it to make it happen. So now I have a baseline to know, okay, this is what an API call looks like that works. Now, how do I need to structure this to be able to use it for my specific scenario? To take that even a step further, embedded with every Rubric deployment is what we call the API Playground. Official name is the API Explorer. What you can do here is now you can start modeling the API calls in your use case. You can come in, set your authorization, whether it be basic authorization or if you've modified a user to have an API token. Once you have that authorization in place, you can now start filtering for what you want to see. If I'm interested in Oracle, I can go like this. If I want to find summary information on rack databases, I can click on that, click on try it out. I can fill out the parameters I need, execute it, and then it's going to give me the actual command that was sent for the API call as a curl command. Then it will give me the parameters that were fed and the output from the request. So I immediately know, did this work or didn't it? So quite helpful, great tools for, especially if you're trying to get started and really understand how the APIs work. Now, what else do I have to show you here? Bang. The really crazy thing is why stop with the zero trust concept and with automation? Once you really get your systems protected with Rubric, you can start using that data to really generate new insights on it. You can leverage our recovery features to present data using a method that fits your need. Imagine taking that data and being able to repurpose it without impacting your production system. Create new data pipelines from these systems, and then ultimately facilitate digital solutions to provide new business insights for your business. All really amazing steps that you can take to make the most out of the data that you're storing in Rubric. So that's the main content. I want to take a minute, review what we've discussed, and talk to you about where you can go from here. All right, so the problem that we were talking about. Legacy solutions really fall short of zero trust data protection goals for a few key reasons. Whether it be lack of immutability, the always-on backup access, lack of detailed access controls, or any combination therein, they're vulnerable. Many of these systems maintain multiple copies of a given backup. This results in bloated storage and the need to procure additional hardware to meet your needs. Activities can be really manually intensive. Script integration, scheduling, coordinating recovery, etc. And the more manual actions, the more cumbersome recovery becomes. The last thing you really want in a DR scenario is a series of cumbersome steps that are manual and dependent on a bunch of resources to accomplish the task. Whatever you do, don't confuse complexity with the concept of separation of duties. So how does Rubric really fix this problem? Well, we talked about some of this already, but let's reiterate. We're giving you secure backups out of the box with the append-only file system, logically air-gapped, and layered security with RBAC, MFA, and TOTP. You've got the encryption by default. You got policy-based protection of objects with SLA domains. You've got that single pane of glass to be able to see what's going on in your Rubric environment and really discern some valuable insights. You can use RBAC to control access to your backups and dependent objects without having to relinquish the keys to the kingdom to your DBAs. You can let Rubric automate the entire backup process and then let the DBAs control how your restores are conducted. And they can do it either from the UI or fully automate the workflow via API calls. Rubric, from a deployment standpoint, is about as close to plug and play as you can get, even for the most advanced architectures. From a storage perspective, eliminate a lot of the duplicate storage, with Rubric's incremental forever approach and writing your initial backups directly to Rubric storage. You really don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. With Rubric, Rubric's going to use the embedded backup technology of the vendor. If you're using Oracle, we're going to use RMAN for the backup. We're not going to go out there and build something on our own. Getting data online quick is integral. So you can use our live mount feature to get access to your data in the fraction of the time that it takes to do a full restore. And then, whether you're looking to do data migration or replicate your backups or simply archive them, Rubric can help you move your data to most major cloud providers. Now, here's a couple resources. The links are going to be on the resources link in the browser. And great stuff if you want to learn a little more about what we have to offer and how some of this stuff works. If you're really interested in learning more about our product and any upcoming features, maybe you want to make a trip to San Diego. Maybe you want to talk to some of the Rubric staff in depth about stuff. If any of that sounds interesting to you, consider registering for our user conference, Forward, and the URL right there, rubric.com/forward. And with that, I appreciate you taking the time to attend the session. I hope you learned something useful, and I hope you have a great day. If there's any questions, I'm ready to take them.
Okay, great. Yeah, really nice presentation there, Sean. And I have to say, it was a great walkthrough of the legacy backup approach versus how Rubric handles things. And I like that granular explanation of what zero trust means in the context of Rubric. So thanks for that. I also want to bring up just quickly a reminder that about the ask the best question, get a $50 gift card. So we've got some questions in here already, but if you've got a question on the tip of your tongue, absolutely ask it, because you might also it benefits you in two ways. So let me bring back Sean's slide here, which actually has the links live in it as well. But Sean, I think you mentioned you were a DBA. What are some of the capabilities that really made you a believer in Rubric?
I've worked with a lot of different backup solutions in my 20 some odd years of DBA work. God, it doesn't seem possible. It makes me sound old. What really caught me with Rubric was how easy it is to roll it out. Just deploy this really, it's a package that you deploy on a Linux host. And once that package is there, you just run into the UI and provide the host name and the schema, or not the schema, I'm sorry, the OS user that owns your Oracle binaries, and you're off to the races from a discovery standpoint. Every other solution that I've worked with has been so invasive on the database side, where you've got to have this custom schema created for, executing all the stuff within the backup. utility, and then it's got to deploy stuff into that schema. So it really, I mean, there's zero invasiveness with the Rubric solution, and that was one thing that I really liked. On top of that, throw in that I no longer have to manage scripts or worry about, is my database online that I'm scheduling all my backups out of, or has my is my cron tab set up right? And it just makes things so much easier. And like I mentioned earlier, it enables me to focus on things that are much more important, like, okay, what are my recovery scenarios and what can I do to make those more efficient?
Gotcha. Yeah, you mentioned the invasiveness, and that brings up another question that's here. It's as far as easy setup, what's the overall process for something like SQL or Oracle? I wonder if you could sort of walk us through that.
Sure, it's actually insanely easy. We've got what we call the Rubric backup service, which is just a simple executable that gets deployed on your host. There's a Windows version for various flavors of Linux, and we've got one for Solaris, AIX, a couple other flavors of OS. Once that is deployed, you then go into the UI, run discovery. If you're working with a Windows, like a SQL Server type solution, it will automatically discover all of the SQL Server instances and databases that are running on a given Windows server. From an Oracle perspective, you run the discovery process, it discovers the host, and then it goes through and says, okay, one, have I found a database that has part of a rack cluster involved in it? Or am I working with a single node database? And with these databases, are these databases in a data guard configuration? So it'll grab all of that metadata and serve it back up so that way you know exactly what kind of database you're dealing with and what's running on it from a broader perspective. So you got a better idea on how to handle it.
Great. No, that sounds pretty straightforward and quick. Question here from Tatiana, who's wondering, is replication available for databases?
Now, the big thing that I like to clarify, spent a lot of years as a consultant, so I tend to qualify everything that's out there. When we're talking about replication, we're talking about, within Rubric, we're talking about replications of the backups. So if you've got a data center A that's here and data center B that's over here, and you're running Rubric deployments on both, you can easily discover the other cluster and say, yes, as part of my SLA, I want you to push a copy of that backup out to my standby data center. And then it'll show up in the standby data center. It'll show that it's replicated, and then you can grab it from there. And if you needed to do a restore, you could do so.
Okay, super. Next question comes from Michelle. She's wondering, does Rubric have a graph database solution as well?
Michelle, can you clarify what type of graph databases you're looking at? Just for me to give you a little more accurate answer.
Okay, super. And while we're waiting for Michelle to get back to us on that one, oh wait, here we go. She says Neo4j.
Not directly, so we don't have anything. A lot of the features that we were talking about here were for our snappable solution, which is that plug and play kind of setup. What we do have is we have what we call a managed volume approach. So that way you could have that mount come online, execute scripts that through the Rubric engine that will then run your scripts to do the backup and then take that offline. So it's not as tightly integrated into Rubric, where it's just that essential plug and play mentality. There is a little bit of manual effort on your end to be able to support those. We're working to build out our capabilities for graph databases like that, and then a lot of the NoSQL end of things too. So you're going to see the solution continue to grow over time. And our stopgap is if we don't have a direct snappable for what you want, odds are we're able to fill that need with our managed volume type approach.
Okay, thanks, John, and thanks, Michelle, for the quick clarification on which graph database you were talking about. And Michelle says thanks for the answer. So great.
No problem.
Another one we have here is from Paul, who's wondering what distinguishes Rubrik's zero trust enablement features versus the competition. So, any thoughts on that one?
Awesome question. A lot of what you'll see is folks are starting to make the move towards zero trust, but most of the solutions really, when you start looking at the automation side of things, is where the zero trust starts to fall apart. So they don't have the mechanisms in place to ensure that, okay, how can I create an API user to go out and make these direct calls? They don't have that tight integration there. So now all of a sudden you've got to have accounts that are accessing a bunch of stuff that really they shouldn't need to have access to.
Okay. So automation is the key differentiator for you guys on that.
That would be one of the many ones, yeah.
Gotcha. The question here comes from Bradford. He's wondering, does the Rubrik solution centralize management and reporting across on-prem and cloud?
And his other question popped up right below it. I was like, oh, is that a clarifier? It can. So we have a SaaS-based solution, or SaaS, however you want to call it, that allows you to see the entire deployment that you have in place. So you might have, say, what we call our CDM features, which is that on-prem cluster to manage your local workloads. And then you have our global management solution that would enable you to manage your cloud workloads and then provide you a single pane of glass to see all of it and manage it centrally.
All right, super. Back to Paul's question about the automation differentiator. What are some of the common use cases that you see for automation? Among sort of among your your best customers, your most your power user customers, and the ones who really get it.
A lot of folks are using it with the larger integrations. So to be able to integrate with like ServiceNow and have your IT workflow for, say, creating a new instance or refreshing an existing instance. Now, I no longer need to have access to Rubric to be able to do that. We can have an integration between ServiceNow and Rubric that manages all of that. So now you're not increasing the number of users that have access to your backup system.
Okay, super. And Bradford likes your sauce versus sass pronunciation. Let's see. Oh, another one from Tatiana is asking, how many clients is a single Rubric host capable of handling?
That's
she puts
a
client
hard
in
one
quotes, so
to.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's databases, but I don't know. Maybe you have obviously a lot more context.
A lot of it's going to depend on the scale of the solution. So when you look at how, from an on-prem perspective, when you look at how Rubric is deployed, it's for old schoolers, it's a pizza box. So it's a 2U appliance that has 4 independent nodes installed in it. Depending on your needs, our SEs work with you in great detail on sizing your environment to make sure you have the correct number of bricks, right, the 2U appliance, to support your needs. And it's not something where we're sizing it to support, say, a 1-year thing, so that then we can come back in a year and milk you for all your work. We look at and say, all right, here's what we're looking at for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, out to a 5-year horizon to make sure you have exactly what you need to keep going. Because we don't want to, feel like you've got to keep coming back to us saying, oh, I need more, I need more, I need more.
Okay, great, thanks. And another question from Bradford here on the ransomware recovery side. It sounds like he's looking for some best practices for recovering from a ransomware attack. And he's wondering, like, simulation or sandbox. What do you guys recommend?
We've got a ton of sessions out there, and there's a couple guys that specialize in this specifically. That have some phenomenal stuff. But essentially what you've got is the concept of the isolated sandbox, where you can do the analysis through a lot of our utilities to say, okay, here's where we believe we're infection free. And then you can set that up in a quarantined area via like live mount, things of that nature, to bring the entire environment online and verify, okay, is everything clear? Before you actually do that, restore back to your production environment and find out that, oh crap, we still got the malware on the system and now we've reinfected ourselves again. So we've got tons of sessions out there, and I think some of the material that's out there will give you a little more information on that. But there's a lot of crazy stuff that you can do within Rubric and with Rubric technologies to help you get there.
Okay, all right, great. Well, Sean, we've taken a lot of questions here. I think really appreciate all your time on it. In the slide that's up is some resources, but any sort of closing thoughts on good ways to get started with Rubric before we close out here?
Well, I think even beyond Rubric, the big thing that as a DBA, what we've got to be thinking of is, for years we had it beat into our heads that, oh, we need backups, we need backups, we need backups. I use the term occasionally, backups suck. they're meaningless. They eat up space, they eat up time, they're a pain in the butt. What we really need to be focusing on is the concept of recovery. So if I focus on, here's exactly what I need to be able to do to recover, what do I need to back up to get me there? And Rubric, I think, really has a lot of tooling to make that obscenely simple. Whether it be going through a few mouse clicks for recovery or fully automating it through API calls, it makes life insanely simple.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sound advice. A lot of times we do get caught up in the backup and forget that it's all about the recovery. So really wise parting words there. So appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Sean. Thanks for bringing us up to speed on Rubric and about databases and how to stay protected with zero trust.
Thanks a lot, Scott. I really appreciate the time, and thanks to everybody for attending.
And with that, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Ken Kaufman from Ohio. So congratulations to Ken. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I do want to thank Rubric and Sean for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. So have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time.